When you look at when Reagan ran in '80, he was at the head of a major national movement that had been around in some form for close to 200 years and in its modern form for almost 50 years at the point that he ran for president. It was a movement saying, you are the best leader for what we believe. Nowadays, and both parties are making this mistake. For the last 6 years, anything Bush has said defines being a Republican, defines being a conservative. Anytime Hillary or Obama are out there saying something, that defines being a Democrat or a liberal. That's not the way it should be. We have lengthy historical-based principles of the role of government in our society, the role of America in the world, with tons of scholars, tons of politicians speaking, and tons of activists, thousands of activists over the years. And that should be the driving principles, and then we find a leader for it, not the other way around. And so we've got to get away from the cult of personality and back toward the roots of what it means to be a liberal, what it means to be a conservative, what it needs to be a Republican, what it needs to be a Democrat. We've lost our way in both parties, and we've got to come back to some semblance of what people really believe in and a core of beliefs that can then be tested in the democratic system.
It's interesting, and you'll remember over the years we've brought in different speakers with education. And if you sit on the board and you really study a lot of the speakers we have, you start to realize how these issues all tie together. And a number of questions have come up about civics in school, about the teaching of history, about, and you've mentioned the 3-second soundbite. It almost seems to many in these questions that people have come to realize that the American people cannot withstand more than a 25-second conversation by anybody. So what part does education play, and what can we do in education?
Again, first and foremost, civics has got to be required in every school system in this country, and not just 1 year of civics, several years. Probably the best course I ever took in my learning experience was a course in administrative law as part of my master's degree, understanding what really due diligence is all about, what really public input and public notice is all about, has served me very well over the years as a community activist as well as a public official. And that's, again, I had to wait till graduate school to get that course. So that's one part. Another part, and this goes back to my time when I was with the National Governors Association. For 3 years I headed their quality task forces in applying business principles into education. One thing we came up with is that in this day and age, you have all of these people, many of you in this room probably, who are retired, but who are basically mentally and professionally viable all the way into your 80s or 90s. And the problem with public education is it is basically hiring these 20-somethings right out of school with no experience. They might have an education degree, and they're the ones teaching our children. When we bring up the issue of, imagine a person who's an engineer, who's retired, going in and teaching mathematics, teaching geometry in a classroom. They can't right now because the teacher unions and the education bureaucrats want somebody with a certification from a teacher college. I've found in my consulting world, you can teach any professional to be a good presenter in probably a day or two. It's just communication skills. It's learning your audience, learning how to take questions, do things like that. But think of a 25-year-old right out of an education school with an education degree with absolutely no grounding in history, no grounding in English, no grounding in science or math. They're the ones teaching. And guess what? If somebody is really good at it, they're going to be cherry-picked by the private sector. And one of the problems in most school districts in this country is teacher retention, either getting cherry-picked by another jurisdiction or that person going off to the private sector. We should unleash the World War II generation and the baby boomers. 2 more years, baby boomers hit 65 years of age. We need to bring this amazing resource into our classroom to help assure our future. But there is so much institutional opposition to that because a person who's an engineer teaching math isn't going to want to join the union because they've already got their retirement. They don't need to fight for all the benefits. It's going to, number one, of course, you reduce the amount of money you actually need to spend on education if you got all these retirees in there teaching. But people just panic that the dynamics, the political powers of the unions and the education associations and bureaucrats are so fundamentally challenged by that demographic shift that it'll never happen. But again, think about that. That's the kind of stuff we need to demand if we're going to assure our democracy into this century.
Of course, the title of the book has to do with the Republican Revolution and the contract with America, and there are a number of questions up there. Number one, saying what went wrong? Number two, didn't it do some good after all?
Absolutely. A lot of good things happened with the revolution. Again, many of us who were part of the Reagan Revolution came into the Gingrich or Republican Revolution of '94 and saw that as phase two. Because when you look back on Reagan, Reagan changed the world. I mean, he, Margaret Thatcher, Pope John Paul II, they were the true troika of the 20th century. They brought down the Soviet Empire. They redefined the role of government and built a moral core for the end of the 20th century. But in Reagan's case, the domestic revolution that he was hoping for ran aground on the Democrats in Congress. So when the Republicans took over in '94, many of us came in saying, this is phase two. We're finally going to be able to take care of the domestic side because now we're in charge of Congress. What we found out was that many Republicans, when we walked in the door and started finding not only the spending abuses, but the amazing array of abuses that the Democrats had put in place over 40 years. I mean, they had literally created a kleptocracy where they were stealing the place blind. I mean, literally, furniture was going out the door and they were reimbursing the government $1 for a $1,000 desk, $1.50 for a $2,000 leather chair. I mean, we literally found cash drawers filled with unmarked bills, 20s and 100s, that were being handed out to members. We found, my favorite is still the check writing machine. We found a machine that wrote checks. And what it is you turn it on, punch in numbers, having a signature block, and out would pop a check. Well, people got tired of turning on the machine and programming it. So the machine was always on, always had the check blanks in, always had the key in for running it, always had the signature block. And the door was unlocked. It was on the ground floor with an unlocked window. And so my staff said, well, how do we know how much abuse might be happening? And the people who we obviously fired afterward said, well, if they write less than $5,000 per check, we'll never know. And this is what was churning out every day for 40 years before we got up there. So we found all this stuff and we said, we've got to do something about it. And some Republicans who had just gotten elected to change things said, our only interest is to make sure that we get our turn at the trough. Basically, if we watch the Democrats for 40 years take full advantage of the system, take advantage of the perks, abuse the Republicans, it's our turn. We want to turn the tables on these people and have our 40 years. Others, Joe Scarborough locally, a lot of people who are the heroes in the book, people like Jim Nussle and Ron Packard and others said, no, we were elected to change things. We're going to change things. And we did. We privatized over a third of House operations. We saved $148 million. We brought in the Cyber Congress for the first time. When I walked up there were still people using Selectric typewriters. There was no intranet for the House. There was no way most offices could email constituents or vice versa. We changed all that.